In the last video, we had a look at saturation and using it to create little pockets of frequency density to allow us to rebalance sounds and almost use it in the same way as we'd use EQ to try and separate things out, declog areas, and create kind of little areas of frequencies and sounds to help the mix come out of the speakers and be a bit more full of life. Now we're going to have a look at another use of saturation, which is similar. It's just another byproduct of saturation, really. We can do that in context of this tech house style track. Now, this is a track I made for the Producing Tech House series on Groove 3. So if you like this kind of music and you like the sound of the track, then definitely go and check that out. So what we're going to do now, we're going to use Decapitator again to create a sound which has a higher RMS versus peak. Now, this is especially important for drums because obviously if we have really, really loud transients and loud peaks in our drum sounds, then we're going to hit our ceiling of 0 dB full scale quicker than if those peaks are slightly tamed and the RMS is higher. So the tail, the sustain of the sound is louder in comparison to the peak. That's how compression works. We all know that. If you're not sure what I'm talking about in terms of compression, then read up on that because that's an important principle to understand. But in the same way as compression allows us to bring down the peak, bring up the sustain, or it could allow us to actually increase the peak or the transient and bring down the sustain. But a lot of the time with compression, we're trying to tame peaks and bring up RMS. Saturation can have the same effect and can actually do it in a more transparent way in some ways, or maybe not even transparent. In some ways, it actually makes the sound bigger, fuller, larger than life in the same ways we saw in the last video. But it has the byproduct of also taming the transient and bringing up the sustain. Let me demonstrate. Now let's have a quick blast of the track. So let's have a look at this clap sound. So I'm going to bring in Decapitator. Now what I'm going to do with this, or what Decapitator is going to do, is create some kind of audio magic for me, because we're going to be able to increase the perceived volume of this clap without actually increasing the peak volume of it. Let me demonstrate what I mean. So I'll just dial in some parameters. I'm going to put the punish mode on, so this is going to be quite extreme overdrive. Let's cut it a little bit, increase a bit of the brightness. Because it's a clap sound, we want that to come through a little bit. Now I'm going to mix this in parallel. I'm going to keep the output quite low. Okay, let's just bypass it. Okay, so let's have a look at our peak level here. So with Decapitator in, we're peaking at -15, and with it off, we're peaking at -13 once again. -15, -13. Okay, so now focus on how much louder the clap feels. So that means to say that this clap sound is now, in terms of peak level, 2 decibels quieter than it was. But in terms of perceived level, it's far, far louder. So we could actually kind of bring this down even further. We're actually losing some of our kind of compression or suppression of the transient because I'm bringing down the mix control. So now we're even higher, -16. So it's 3 dB quieter, but obviously much louder in terms of perceived level. Now this is an extreme setting, so I don't have to have the punish on. Listen to all that extra level I've got without there actually being any extra level. So the next challenge is to fine tune this so it isn't too harsh, you know, and it kind of works in the context of the track. Now, it's good to do this in parallel a lot of the time because that means you can maintain the transient as it is. So what you're really doing is just dialing in a load of extra sustain energy, which allows the track to come through more in the mix. So that's just a fantastic demonstration of that. Let's have a look at the hat sound here. Actually, let's choose this hat because that one already sounds quite crunchy. So you can hear, again, that hat is coming out of the mix so much more, but there's no real change in level. I think it was slightly louder, maybe a dB, but if I actually gain match that or volume match that exactly, then I'm sure you'll find, again, we'll be saving ourselves peak energy. Okay, so let's try taking all our drums and we'll put them to a bus. And let's try a little bit of bus processing for this. Let's just try using Radiator. So again, this is going to be saturating the drums. I'll do it with the mix control down and bring it in. So we're going in a little bit louder, but listen to all that extra volume we're getting out. I mean, it is louder, so it's going to come out a little bit more, but it's not just volume, it's adding extra harmonics to the drums, creating life and vibe in the drums. And because I've EQ'd this, again, taking that little bit of bass and boosting slightly the treble, I'm kind of tilting the drums or tilting the radiator output, which we're mixing in to be favouring the high frequency slightly. So it's kind of bringing out and decluttering, again, that low mid area, helping kind of the bass sit a little bit better because the drums are being taken away from there a little bit. So you can see, again, another use for saturation, different style of music, but still works perfectly. So enabling us to tame our transients, bring up our sustains, increase our RMS. And when you come to mastering your track, at the end of it, you're going to thank yourself if you try and do this as much as possible. Subtly, a little bit goes a very long way. You don't want to overdo saturation because the mix will just fall apart. So you've got to be really, really mindful when you're doing it. Just little bits here and there. And by the end of it, you'll have a mix which has got a really nice, warm kind of feel to it. And I don't mean that in a kind of negative way. If you're looking for a bright kind of punchy mix, that's fine. But it's going to have that kind of density to it that you get with analog emulations and saturation. And this is why when digital first came in the kind of 80s and 90s, all the engineers hated it because they didn't get anything back from it. It was just a true representation of sound. Whereas when we had analog gear before that, and obviously now we're still using analog gear now, these plugin emulations, they bring in extra harmonics just from the kind of degradation of the signal. It's the limitation of the equipment itself. But actually our ear likes the fact that it brings in these slight kind of imperfections to the sound. And that's what saturation is. So what we're trying to do is inject a little bit of that principle using these plugins to create extra harmonics, tame transients, create nice big fat waveforms. And as I said, when it comes to mastering, it's a far easier job than trying to limit the hell out of everything at the end, because you've got all these crazy transients and a very low RMS. Okay, so that's saturation. In the next video, we're going to have a look at some of the spatial effects in the Soundtoys bundle. Thanks for watching.